you know. And one of this, well, actually, the first one they got was this boy from East St. Louis. I never knew whether he did it purposely, but he was going out, leaving, and he had his clothes up in his arms, and he dropped them. And I don't know to say whether he did it deliberately or not, but at least we could see that he at that point was still living, you know. But basically, what they did, they took us back, and we did have to strip down, and they had people that went through our clothes, every scene, ever. And then I thought at first, well, they're going to give us some physical, medical exam, because they run their hand through your hair. They looked in your ears. You had to look in your mouth and all the other openings you had. And basically what they were doing was searching us.
Okay, for anything you might have concealed.
Right. And somehow I ended up again with a short stub of a pencil I had right up in this area in my belt. We were still wearing the same clothes that we were captured in. And but anyway, they put three of us in a cell there in the beginning, and we've been on that train almost 24 hours, or it had been 24 hours since we had, actually slept.
Right.
So the first thing we did, we got in that cell was this captain, and there was a sergeant and myself in there. The captain, they only had one fold-down bunk. It was a 7x9 cell. And so they had a little pallet there, and I lay down on that, and the sergeant had a blanket. And we were asleep. We went to sleep. We heard this awful commotion in the cell next door, and we were in the process of getting up. About the time our cell door opened, and then there were three of them come in there, and they gave us a beating because we had, and they made us to know that from I don't know, about 5 in the morning or 6 o'clock or something till 9, we were not to lie down. We either stood or squatted or whatever. But that was the first.
So that was the rule. Only during the sleeping time could you lie down. The rest of the time you had to either be standing or squatting.
Sitting.
Sitting.
But, we could sit on the edge of the fold down bunk they had in there.
And the penalty for lying down during those times was a beating.
Yeah, and any other thing he'd catch you with. We were adjacent to the other cell, and just to pass the time, we didn't really have too much to say to each other. We would tap out. The only thing we had was a bowl and a spoon and a glass. Their sanitary facilities were very crude. Basically, we had a honey bucket.
Okay, so just a bucket in the corner, and probably didn't empty that as often as...
Well, they emptied it once a day, but the same guy that emptied come in with the bread on his arm, so we ended up with dysentery, so we'd like to... I think that's the sickest I've ever been. But anyway, we would just use a spoon, we'd tap Morse code, to the cell next door.
Next door, yeah.
They caught us doing that too. And it
So
didn't have
that
to,
was
you didn't
another
have,
beating?
they would take us out of the cell once a day, and we had to go down a flight of steps to a little courtyard. I know we get the first day, this big old burly German, he says, Parlez-vous français? No, first he said, Sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Do you speak German?
Yeah. Parlez-vous français?
You speak French. Yeah.
No one said anything, although there were most of us understood some French, but he pulled out his big old liver, Verstehen Sie Pistol? And then he did his lips like this, which meant that if we talked, we're going to get shot, and we had to maintain a certain distance between each other. We couldn't even talk when we were out there on that in that.
Was that part of the penalty for the Morse code communication? The fact that you couldn't talk when you were actually
No, that
seeing
was
one another,
was for this a long time before this. That was the first day that we were there.
Yeah.
That they, that they.
Well, were they doing this to try to break you down so you would talk, or was it just cruelty?
Well, I think it
mainly?
was a matter of again showing their authority and the fact that they didn't want any communication, so we might share what what happened. Because see, the day, the following day is when the interrogation started, and they made it clear up front that if they got the information that they wanted, and it included that they would let us go or ship us on to the prison camp. Basically, what they were saying they needed was this information to verify that we were actually airmen. Anyway,
did anybody crack and tell them what they wanted to know?
Otherwise, we would be, and they gave a list of things, beginning with foreign squad, and all these operations they were going to perform on us, including castration, and then that they had other places that they could send us worse than that one, and so forth. I had my doubts.
Did you all take all these threats seriously, or did you think
part
of it was bluff? Or?
Well, Danny, I looked at it this way. Their list of questions included the military end of it, which was everything from the time you were in the service until you were shot down, when, where, and how, and all that stuff. But their main interest in the beginning was on what had happened since we'd been in France, where we were, who we were with, names, things.
Right, identify some of those people in the
What they were after was that organization. Now, you asked the question, they was in late September when the Luftwaffe finally came and got us. There were 13 of us left of the original 20, and the only one of the 7 that was captured at Marcel Doré was the red Englishman. If he had been an American, I would have almost insisted that he be court-martialed, but since he was...
Yeah. Well,
I don't know really what happened to him.
Of the 7 that didn't make it from there, some died from the dysentery. Was anybody actually executed by firing squad?
No, there was never. Now, they had one kid. Well, he was one of the 7 of us. He came up missing. So see, no matter even the times we had dysentery, if you had to they dragged one kid out of the cell and just rolled him down the steps. He was too weak to walk, and then and many times we had to help. Luckily, there were 3 of us together, but during that phase.
Well, now, were the rations still this boiled grass soup? Or?
Yeah, but after that first interrogation, they came around and they put this sign on our door that says 1/2 KOST, period. We wondered what it was, but then the next time they came around with rations, we found out they had us on half rations.
So you didn't have too much to start with, and then only half of that. So
we actually was concerned how long we could live on this ration.
I guess you lost a lot of weight on that kind of diet.
Over 100 pounds.
Lost 100 pounds in how many weeks' time?
Well, so we were on those rations for total 82 days.
82 days.
Yeah, I went from 182 to less than 80.
So
I could go around my leg with my finger and my waist with.
Yeah. So I guess it was hard to stand, and
Oh yeah.
climb steps. And
Yeah, you couldn't get up from a lying position, you know. You'd have to hesitate, you know. It's kind of a sitting position, and
right.
we couldn't. Again, these it didn't matter what rank they were, or any German integer cage, so to speak. You know, you had to get to your feet, and you had to stand at attention, and it was getting hard to do that, you know, unless you heard them coming. But they interrogated us about every day for a period of several weeks, and we could tell, and we got just a word or two that the other prisoners were bringing the food. Of course, they were heavily guarded when they came by. They had at least 2 or 3. I never saw those people except when they didn't have at least 3 together. They would never, even in our weakening condition and really no ways of self-defense. They never took a chance.
Still let you congregate, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so
you know, when they would discipline you, there'd always be 3 of them. 2 with the guns and one with fists, you know.
To do the beating, yeah. Well, this situation then ended finally when you were transferred to a regular POW facility, or what?
Dan, like I said, we got there in June. In the latter part of September, I don't know you recall that there was an airborne invasion. I think they call it Arnhem, that they were supposed to trap the German army between Germany and cut them off. You know. Anyway, it failed, but that was. I'm sure that had a factor in our release, because mostly as time went on, the interrogations became less frequently. We were still interrogated at least twice a week or something like that, but their list of questions became diminished. They stopped asking us anything about our stay in France, and we knew from that, and the fact that their faces got longer and their spring in their step disappeared, that things weren't going too well.
So once the tide started to turn against them, being concerned about who's in the French resistance, they got a whole lot bigger problems.
Well, particularly after France had been mostly or practically all liberated.
Right,
so
and now.
But anyway, this was in September, and late in the afternoon, which was unusual because most of our interrogations took place mostly in the morning, and we were called in for interrogation, and they had reduced their list of questions. They had 3 things that they wanted to answer. One was the date and where I was shot down, the name, my unit, group, and group commander, squadron commander, and where the location of our base in England. Now I still just answered with name, rank, and serial number, and I never will forget that statement, that interrogation officer, or whatever he might be, a Gestapo. He looked at me and like he was like sending arrows through me. He said, "I hope you die in here, rot in here," I think is what he said. And then I went back to the cell, and after I'd been back in my cell and had time to, to really look over those questions, I would have, if I'd had an opportunity, to recant, I would have. And I found out later that most of the others had given them that information.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered, you know, if I was really going to rot in that place.
Yeah.
But when it came time for the evening meal, when they brought the soup, all these prisoners that was bringing the soup, they had a grin from ear to ear, and they had that Big Dipper, and they filled that bowl up, and they even came back and wanted to give you seconds. You know.
So they went from half rations to
so
seconds.
we were back on full rations,
Yeah.
and I, at least from my standpoint, I was getting the full rations, and then it was that same night, in the middle of the night actually, they came and got us out of the cell, and at this time we were in solitary confinement and had been for a number of weeks, what really didn't bother me that much, because after you're in a cell with 3 people and you're at that age, you don't have a whole lot of life experience to talk about. Mm-hmm. And you don't have any outside information, mm-hmm. any communication. You know, you finally run out of things to say.
Right, right.
So, anyway, we went downstairs, and about as good a sight as I had seen was that blue uniform of the German Luftwaffe, their Air Force. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, after we'd been there, of course we'd been in Paris for 30 days, and we'd been in this hellhole for a month longer, and finally the Germans couldn't stay in when they came in to shave our head, or actually they didn't shave it, they just clipped it off, and check for lice and whatnot. They'd have to hold their nose. They finally let us go down and take a shower, and they issued us. We got those striped mm-hmm. suits, and we kept our GI shoes, but anyway, it was they'd turn the water on for about a minute, and you'd get wet, and then they'd give you 2 or 3 minutes to soap up, and they'd turn it on for about 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, you went about 60 days there without a bath.
Oh, at least. And same, we didn't take, it was so cool, even in the summertime, it was so cool there that other than our shoes, we slept in our clothes. We never had our clothes
Never
on.
had them off during all that time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But anyway, they had laundried the civilian clothes that we had come in with, and they had those laid out for us, and we. I really don't remember I don't remember taking a shower then, but I do know that we went back into those civilian clothes, mm-hmm. and it, as I indicated earlier, Westlaw, where the interrogation center was, mm-hmm. was near Frankfurt, so it wasn't a long mm-hmm. ride, and we got there again in the middle of the night, and we just we just slept on the floor, Mm-hmm. We wouldn't mm-hmm. put any.
But and how long were you there before you went up to near the Sweden on the Baltic Sea? Were you?
Well, we were there for. I would say maybe not a week, but we were there for several days. One of the most depressing things I encountered, the next morning, we went in for, again, interrogation with mm-hmm. with the Luftwaffe. Right. And this German major was in there, and he was very apologetic for the treatment that we had, or I'd gone through, and he said that he had lived in Baltimore. He had flown for American Airlines, and he started asking me the same questions I'd heard umpteen times.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, I've heard those questions from people that's rougher looking than you, and I didn't answer them, and I'm not about to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave him my name, rank, serial number for, again, no telling how many times, and he just said, well, you don't have to tell me. And he had this dossier or some kind of record, and he knew everything about me from the time I was born until where I went to school, when I went in the Army, where I was in the Army, when I went overseas,
Had they obtained that through espionage?
I don't
or?
know where they got that information. But I tell you, it really struck me like a bolt of lightning.
Yeah.
Because the only thing that the Gestapo, and I still think that he wasn't real straight with me, because I saw people in that interrogation out in that Luftwaffe place that had interrogated me
Mm-hmm.
when we were in that political prison.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the only reason that they gave that we had to answer all those questions was to prove to them that we were American airmen. See, they kept telling us that they were holding us as enemy agents, espionage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, true. You know, we were caught in enemy territory in civilian clothes, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then
Well, they were treating you as spies.
all the time they knew who we were.
Mm-hmm.
They were, you know, but and I don't know what happened to the 7 that left before we. There was only 13 of us of the original 20 that. And the only people that they had there were people that were involved in this airborne invasion. Mm-hmm. They were glider pilots, pilots that pulled the
mm-hmm.
the towed the gliders.
Mm-hmm.
And if memory serves me correctly, it was the British Second Army that failed to connect with their forces, and they said they had 10,000 British paratroopers, and I don't know how many they had, but I know that they had them 4 abreast, and they were marching them, and they stretched as far as the eye could see, and they were singing at the top of their, and they had been there, I don't know, a week longer than they were supposed to have held their objectives, you know. Mm-hmm. But the British Second Army never hooked up with them. Right. But anyway, those ones they had there, the American pilots and whatnot, they wouldn't give us the time of day. We'd ask them, you know, who was playing in the World Series or who won the presidential election, and they'd look at us like we were nuts.
Why do you suppose that was?
Well, we looked kind of bad, I guess, you know, just skin and bones and
but
wearing
still,
these old
if you're American,
civilian clothes that were done draped over your bones, you know, 2 sizes, 3 sizes.
Okay, so even if they recognized that you were speaking English, they wouldn't necessarily know.
Oh yeah, they
you
knew we were
as
speaking English, but I don't know. Again, you know, that since the Germans were good at invading other people's space, you know,
that might have made them suspicious.
But no, they wouldn't. They were.
Well, I'm gonna have to jump ahead here a little bit because our time's going to run out on us. But at the time that you got transferred, did your folks back home get notified finally that you were alive and prisoner, or I mean, they had assumed you were dead.
Well, yeah. Well, I'd been reported killed in action. Yeah, I got to Stalag Luft 1 then in it was the latter part of October, close to November. I think they got, but they didn't get the message that I was. Well, let me go back. I was reported missing in action on March 16th. Mm-hmm. I believe it was in the first week or two of August that they got the message that I'd been killed in action.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the 8th of December.
Mm-hmm.
That part I really, it's really a little difficult. But anyway.
But they did, they were
They
eventually
reported
notified
it, you know,
that you were
they
right.
were, basically, they were getting in the car to go to Salmon's Baptist Church, and they were having they were going to they had planned to have a memorial service. My mother had kept putting them off.
Right, right.
When this messenger arrives from Fort Campbell, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
with the news that I'm in prison camp.
So they were on the way to what would have been your funeral service, and they got word then that you were
Yeah.
alive. Oh my goodness! I'm sure your mother just probably collapsed with hearing that. Well, now you were in the I don't remember the name of the town you said, but up near Sweden and on the Baltic. So as the war's winding down, the Russian troops are closer to you than the American and the English. So
That's right. We were at Barth, Germany, is upon on the Baltic. Well, actually, we're out on a peninsula, and we can hear. We're close enough to the Oder River between Germany and Poland. See, the Russians have been there for a good time. You know, they can't get across the river.
Okay.
But and then the Allied, the British and American, they start particularly giving them air support.
Mm-hmm.
They fly right over our camp, and we go out and cheer them to the Germans stuff like that. So they say when they started air raid alert, and we were supposed to stay inside too. They were some British that it happened on Sunday morning. They were going to church and they did fire them. They killed a couple of them. Anyway, the Russians so-called liberated us, but the German soldiers left. Well, I guess about the 1st of May, they took off they didn't want to get caught by the Russians, so they took off to the American, British side. I think the Americans was up around Hanover and up to there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
So they essentially left.
Oh, they left.
The camp.
They abandoned the camp, and there was a military organization of the camp even before the Germans left. We had what they call a senior Allied officer.
Okay.
Each compound, and by the way, there were 5 compounds in this POW. There was about
I guess
50.
that was based on your rank before you were captured.
No, they only the compound that I was put into, they had what we call the wheel barracks. That's where the senior grade officers were. You know, your majors and lieutenant colonel and colonels, and
So when
and
the
rest
Russians,
of it, the others, the lieutenants and captains, we occupied, and then there was a British compound. And in that, I think they had the French and whatever other European nationalities.
so when the Russians finally arrived, you all could basically march out to meet them, right?
Well, the first one that came by was about a week later, and he was kind of an advance party, and he was there. Oh, I don't know. Their sights on everything. They thought more of everything was either Stalin or Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
And they mentioned Roosevelt's name, and they were actually wearing mourning.
For Roosevelt?
Yeah.
Huh.
And Roosevelt is dead or kaput or whatever. And then he drinks to Truman, this is his toast, I mean, they're more aligned with the leaders than they are the country, it seems to me, But then the next guy comes along, and he's a drunken cowboy, and he wants to know why we are still behind those barbed wire enclosures. Why aren't we in town looting the stores and raping the women and all this stuff? And Colonel Zemke is the Allied officer in charge, and his operation officer is Colonel Gabreski, who is Polish descent, and Colonel Gabreski is doing the interpretation. But anyway, he pulls out his gun, and he points it right at the colonel's head, and he said, he told him he was some kind of a field marshal before. They asked him what his rank was. He said, Colonel. He said, he was field marshal. I order you to order your troops to tear down the fences and go and do whatever they want to do, to that extent. And the colonel says, boys, you heard what he said. And it still amazes me how you can go from one situation, a quite peaceful situation, to just total chaos. I mean, it wasn't 5 minutes. Every fence, every guard tower on that place was laying on the ground.
Yeah. Huh.
Just by main force and awkwardness.
Yeah. Well, looking at my watch here, I see our time's about up, but let me ask you, when did you get home? Did you get home before the war was over, or was peace already declared when you got home?
We left. Finally, they got the Russians agreed that they sent in the 8th Air Force to this airfield outside of the camp, and they flew us down to Lahore, where they had this evacuation camp called Camp Lucky Strike. It was a tent city, and that was on May 13th, but it was in 45. And and like I indicated before, my fellow crewmen were the ones that had been captured. They were actually leaving, debarking to go home the day that we arrived there. But we stayed down there until June the 12th. They even had General Eisenhower to come down and give us a little pep talk. Because, But anyway, and I got back and they put us on some Liberty ships. They triple-decked us. Had to take turns sleeping. If you wanted more than one meal a day, when you finished the first one, you had to get in line for the second.
Oh, my goodness.
But the general said, if you don't complain about your accommodations, I'll see you get home, so that was it. So, we arrived in Newport News, Virginia on the 20th of June.
20th of June of 45.
Before the war, and then we went to Camp Atterbury and was given 60-day rest and recuperation leave, and was supposed to report back, and did report back to Miami Beach.
I see.
But in the meantime, they dropped the bomb, and Japan had threw in the towel, and what they had promised that they didn't understand why we were in such a hurry to go home, because we weren't going to be discharged. We were just going to be retrained and sent to Japan. So,
but it didn't turn out that way.
Didn't turn out that way.
Well, Dr. Freas, that's a real fascinating story. I appreciate
I'm sorry
you coming in. No, that's all right. I was afraid our tape's going to run out before we got to the end, but I think we got it covered. So, thanks very much for coming in and sharing those.
Well, it's a,
Painful
I
memory
know
with
it's a long story, and it's,
Well, it's one that bears repeating, though, and one that future generations, need to hear, and